Hello, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you this morning on Channel 9 and on WJOPLP Newburyport FM 96.3. We're also live streaming on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I am just delighted to welcome back one of my favorite guests. Matthew Daniel is here. He is the guiding teacher and co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society of Newburyport. Matthew, thank you for visiting the morning show once again. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I love being here and love our conversations.
It's always enlightening and inspiring. So thanks for coming. You know, your recent In the Spirit column in the Daily News really hit home with me. And I've been just so eager to talk with you about its insights ever since. I know a lot of people like myself who have found the constant onslaught of news about threats to democracy, about the dangers of homegrown domestic terrorism and white power movements to be deeply disturbing and also profoundly discouraging. I'll find myself thinking, I thought we were past this. Or is this what human beings really are? Are we condemned to cycles of hatred and violence and pendulum swings between democracy and autocracy? And these thoughts bring me a range of emotions, as you might not be surprised to find out, ranging from discouragement and disappointment to sometimes the edge of despair. And I hope perhaps you wouldn't mind sharing with us the personal story of your encounter with disappointment and discouragement, which launched your column, which was titled, "The Leaves Will Always Fall." If you could tell us what happened and your emotional response to it.
So I think that, so the article itself was based on something that's not quite as dramatic, profound, or far-reaching as the examples you were giving. There is very, very simple sense of reactivity, but we can draw some lessons from this and then extrapolate or expand out into different parts of life. So this was based on my own desire, something at the center. So we've had the Newburyport Insight Meditation Center running for well over a decade now. And something I've wanted to do for a long time, but haven't done is to get some people together and go along the roads. It's in this beautiful area along the reservoir, near the reservoir for Newburyport. And a lot of people go there to walk, to run. And the roads can get pretty filled with trash, garbage. So I just wanted to get a crew together and go out and clean them. And the incentive came from the experience that I had in Japan many years ago, where I was in an intentional community where the founder would go, and we did it later, go to people's homes and offer their services to do cleaning, to do whatever would be helpful, in the service of both self-purification and also creating more harmony and balance in the world. So to me, it was this act was just a sense of looking at how our behavior in the world and how our inner cultivation are linked, how there's an interdependence of those two things. So what I found in this experience was we went and cleaned. There was just about 5 or 6 of us and spent maybe a couple hours. It was wonderful. And by the end, the back of my old car was filled up with garbage bags and a tire, and we all kind of went away feeling that we'd done a little part and feeling grateful for being able to connect and provide something beautiful for the world, a little more harmony in the world. So then that felt great. And then the next day, since I live near the center and I like to walk the same area, I was out walking on this loop. And what I noticed pretty quickly was areas where I had been not very thorough in picking things up. And also I noticed that there was already trash accumulating, a Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup, a garbage bag from yesterday, from the day before. And immediately my inner response moved from this sense of connection and, oh, this has been cleansed and purified and how wonderful, to disappointment and frustration at myself. I felt blaming myself and the other people that would do this. And I'm making a whole judgments about this, how they were educated and brought up and things like this.
Yeah.
So that's how that was the motivator for dealing with with what comes up when we do something, and then it seems like it just gets, it doesn't last. So in that way, it connects directly with your experience, that emotional reactivity, that sense of being futility, of being stuck, and that you can interpret on the levels of democratic swings, of all different levels in society, of social justice, and it does often seem like there's one step forward, two steps back, or that there's this pendulum swinging, right? And that no matter what we do, there's not this lasting change that would fit our ideal of what we would like to see in the world in terms of human rights, in terms of balance, in terms of the environment, etc. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, and you know, the metaphor of sweeping up the garbage, and you know, and then there's more garbage. And your use of the word reactivity I like, because reactivity inherently implies that there is some other way that's less reactive and perhaps more responsive that we have as an option. But it also, I like it because it can apply to inner garbage as well as outer garbage. You know, for me, Matthew, working on inner garbage, so to speak, it's something I understand. Trying to, you know, stay steady, bring love and kindness to bear inwardly and outwardly, and knowing that I need to mindfully steady myself and respond instead of react every day. That I work on. That comes naturally to me. But it's the outer garbage that catches me. That's where I really get hooked into reactivity. You know, for example, just to expand, you know, the reactivity or the pendulum swings, when we all witness the brutality and the actual sadism of the attacks on the police officers on January 6th at the Capitol, or the spreading of really dangerous lies about the legitimacy of Biden's election, lies which they're not neutral. They create the danger of violence and harm to real live human beings. So the stakes are high, and for me, it can feel not just discouraging but alarming and scary. And I wonder, how can we apply the little parable of the sweeping to these outer world threats in some way that helps us not be reactive, but to be something else?
Well, I think it really, I mean, it's a very, very good question, and it's poignant. And I think from the place of, since I teach insight meditation, it's based very much on being able to align ourselves with how things are as a first step. And then when we do that, we see what actually, so we can see more clearly when we do that. And that's a lot of what the practice is. And, you know, watching the breath, just taking care in our daily life so that we kind of cut through, we sweep away our tendencies to get caught in these negative reactive loops. And all those examples are classic places where this can take place internally. So what we learn to do is to have a pause and then to see clearly and say, this is how it is. This actually is how it is. And if you want to take the broad sweep of history, you can see how it's just been these swings. This is how it's been in time immemorial. When humans get together, we seem to mess things up and then try to make them better and mess them up and make them better. And that's how it goes. So, but that's just a philosophical perspective. That doesn't help us so much. So if we actually just get into the moment and see this is how it actually is, then from that place we can see, and we have our heart oriented in the right place. And that's very important. So if we are oriented in where we want to create change, but it's done with hatred or vengeance, then there's a basic principle in the teachings of the Buddha, and it just seems to make sense that all of our human actions come from what's in the heart and mind. Every act that is destructive, every act that is positive, it comes from motivation. It comes from the quality of being able to look into cause and effect in a way that isn't just blind and reactive. So from that place, if we have that principle, then it empowers us in any situation to actually look at, okay, this is how it is. Get calm, see, this is how it is, and then what can I do? So the Dalai Lama, it's attributed to the Dalai Lama, has a wonderful teaching that says, if you can change it, why worry? And if you can't change it, why worry? And all that doesn't mean we don't have our
Yeah.
initial reaction. What it means
Yeah.
is that if we can change it, then the wisdom, the clarity, the renewal of being present rather than just spinning out in reactivity gives us strength to see, okay, what can I actually do? What can I do to affect change, whether it's small or large? And there's a devotion to that kind of compassionate response that is at the heart of both wisdom and engagement. So the other side is, so if we can, then we do it. And we may want to change the political, we may want to do something that's much bigger than we can actually do. So what can we do? So often, I know growing up with my mother, she would have, there's a bumper sticker, classic old bumper sticker from the 70s. Think globally, act locally.
Yes, I remember that.
So that's meant
Yeah.
to be grounded in reality
Yeah.
in what we can do. Now,
Yeah.
some people have really different capacities. Some people can be great leaders and create great change, and some people need to be what we think is smaller. So on the other hand, if we can change it, do what we can do. Just be wise as best as we can. And if we can't change it, then we have to understand that and be able to understand that everything, and this is the wisdom piece, and much of the teaching that was in this article is around seeing that everything arises and passes away. It all is based on cause and conditions. It comes and goes. So the image that was given from the teacher Ajahn Chah, this Thai forest teacher, was that of the monks sweeping a path, where the leaves keep falling, but they keep sweeping. So they're creating conditions where they can be grounded, so they can take each step with things as they are. It's not blocked, but they know they have to keep doing the work to stay grounded. So that's where we need to keep coming back to the present, to the present. And then if there's a call for greater action, we can move from that place, or we can realize we actually aren't empowered, and then we just work with the natural human emotions that come up in that situation. So much of our life, our difficulties come from loss and grief.
Yes.
And wishing things to be a stable way when they're not. Change is not just change, but it's unpredictable. So those are the dynamics that we're working with here. And then we can apply them to any different level of our life. But we get caught in the idealism that the world has to be different, and we feel disempowered. We get caught in that emotion. We don't have any freedom. So there can be the victimization of the world, but then we can victimize ourselves if we don't take care of our hearts and minds. And to me, that's often the greatest tragedy in a lot of these situations, is that we get paralyzed internally. And that's actually not the most effective response even to create change.
Right.
It's certainly not the most effective response to create a balance of life as we're living as best we can. So, but it's also just human nature. That's what we do.
Yes, we do. Yeah. What you're saying reminds me of the wisdom of the Serenity Prayer. When you talk about identifying what is just the way things are, and finding a way to be at peace with that. But then if there's a way that one can intervene and make some kind of change, there is the call to, and compassion leads us toward intervening there. And that's really helpful to me, because one of the things I'd wanted to ask you about is, to me, there can feel like a tension between, there's a kind of a serenity and tranquility that can come from saying, well, this is the way things are, I didn't invent the world, I enter the world as it is. And to assume that it could be otherwise is to leave the present moment, it's to leave reality, as you've been pointing out. But to me, then, as soon as I start, I guess you could call it sweeping with a cause, or sweeping with an expected outcome. And it's easy, and I think very human, to get caught up in hoping that you can not just work toward change, but you can will it somehow through the energy and the intention of your sweeping to be otherwise. And then it can feel like the activism can pull away from tranquility. And I know for me, and I'm probably not the only one who can experience this as a kind of a tension, because once I start sweeping with the cause, even though I know I shouldn't, I start getting attached to the outcomes that I hope my sweeping will be having, even though another part of my mind knows those leaves are falling back there when I turn around. So I wonder, Matthew, if you have any insights into that as what I see as a kind of it's an inner pendulum swing or an inner kind of tension in how we can find a way to have some kind of activism, if that's the right word, and be tranquil while we do it.
What I think I'd like to ask you a question, actually. What brought you to do what you do now? Because I would say the work that you're doing is an activist work to bring forth issues of the day, to try to see if you can help through dialogue with different speakers, bring out some information, some knowledge, some experience that might really be helpful, right? In
Right.
affecting change. Is that, you said that's correct in terms of what motivates you on some level
Yes.
to do this?
Yeah, yes, I stumbled into this opportunity when I saw a newspaper article that WJOP was looking for volunteer radio hosts. I had never thought about doing anything like this before, was not on my bucket list, Matthew. But something clicked inside and I thought, I want to do this. Isn't that interesting that I want to do it? And it gave me the opportunity to meet people like you, to have a reason to read an article you'd written and to reach out to you and say, hey, I've got this show, I'd love to talk to you. And yes, sort of one of the guiding principles for the people I choose, talk to all kinds of people about all kinds of things, but it's usually somebody who I think can talk in an informative way about a topic, whether it's history, whether it's Buddhism, whatever it is, about something that will be interesting and helpful to me, and therefore I expect and hope will be interesting and useful to other people.
So I think that you just illuminated
I may have
in a very organic way of being present, and an opportunity came to you. So what I'm doing now. I didn't do a kind of degree granting program to become a insight meditation teacher.
Yeah.
I just was following my passion, and I was asked to. So it was something that wasn't on my radar, but then once it opened up, it felt like there was a balance of nourishing myself and also contributing something that felt very wholesome. And it sounds it's the same way for you. So I think that we need to recognize in our own lives how we are actually manifesting in a way that does move in a certain direction. And if we realize that we're ignoring the signals of doing that, which we can do when we're overwhelmed, when we're angry, right? Then we have to be able to make the through wisdom, see what impulses we want to follow. And then we're humans. So we keep, just like you said, on the macro level, on the micro level, we're humans too. Some lessons we learn and we move on. Some, they just keep coming back depending on the strength of them. So I think there's a level of humility that cuts through a kind of grandiosity that can sabotage the project of actually, for each one of us, following what the signals are and then responding and actually getting results that are beneficial for ourselves and others.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. And I'm intrigued by the pairing of grandiosity with the feeling that I was describing before. Well, this activism should lead to something. There should be something to show for it, and not something to show for it that I discover, but what I had in my mind when I started. I thought it should result in you. The word should keeps coming through, doesn't it, as I talk about this issue, Matthew? And should, I've never thought of should as an expression of grandiosity before, but it is, isn't it? That's such a useful insight. So,
well, we get, to tone the language down a little, we get caught in idealizations.
Yes.
Right. So that could be grandiosity, but it could be small, but it's idealizations that aren't, so the image is that things should be this way, but they are this way.
Yeah.
Right. And there's in between this gap, there's often a lot of energy trapped or frozen. Yeah. And that's the problem. It's not there's a gap, and it doesn't mean, see, when there's a should be, when we think it should be different, that can marshal energy for real change.
Yeah.
And that can have emotion attached to it as well. That's not, part of that is temperament as well. Part of that is just two people can manifest in very different ways based on their temperament. Some may be much more of an activist bend, and they do it with as much equanimity as they can, but there might be more fiery emotions involved just naturally. Others are realize that they don't want to be in the fray that way. but they still, that's their temperament, but it still doesn't mean they're not working with the same dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Of learning to, so it should be versus is, and learning not to get trapped in that energy, but to see it, give it space. That's a lot of what being aware is. It's allowing things to be, ourselves and others to be as they are, but then from that clear seeing to move when it's appropriate. Sometimes the seeing itself, if there's enough calmness and we just see into a situation clearly through interest, through curiosity, or just that's how it is. Sometimes that seeing dissolves a reactive pattern, and that's all we need. And on the ground in our human relationships, that can be the most powerful thing. Rather than imposing our idealizations on a situation, then struggling and comparing what someone else is saying or we're saying to that, or we're acting to that. So that frees up a lot of energy to do that. And that's empowering. Right? That shift of clear seeing is empowering. Because, and it also gives us a place, no matter what happens, we've worked from the inside. So that's the confidence. We work from the inside out. And then we respond from what comes from the outside in. Right? But we're constantly working with that place where there's more awareness and there's more sensitivity and kindness, but also strength, so that we can move with the changes and not get so thrown off by them, but also feel them at the same time. So I know the last heat wave we just had, right? That was, whew.
Yeah, I'll say.
Yeah, or you look at COVID in general, that really threw us off. But then in each situation, if we come into it, then what's skillful action here? What's correct action here? So I slept in the basement. But the idea that I had to sleep upstairs and it was 94 degrees, right? And I know I'm just gonna, nope, this is my, no. Conditions change, I'll go sleep upstairs again, right? So it's just, it's the same thing with activism. It's the same thing. Sometimes blocks are too great, and sometimes there's freedom of movement, and sometimes you need to hold back. So, and again, I think knowing our own temperament is actually really is really important when we make decisions on how to and how to move in the world. So it sounds like you've got a good activism fire in you.
Yeah. Well, I love everything you're saying, but I'm particularly intrigued by the idea of that energy can be frozen by our reactivity. And I think that when energy feels frozen, that exacerbates feelings of hopelessness because you're frozen internally and then you can't move externally. I think that's a very powerful insight. And I love what you say about when you bring awareness itself, the power of awareness to bear on your reactive tendencies, that in itself is like a portal to melting what's frozen, and then enables you. I mean, you can't deal with reality unless you're in it, right? Unless you're in the moment, you're somewhere else. You're nowhere really. And so those are very powerful ideas. And the other thing I really like that you said that I know I'm going to ponder more is that idealism is linked, inextricably linked to, can be linked depending on temperament and some other factors to, but I guess I'd call the danger of nihilism. Because if you're idealistic and then you get attached to ideas about your idealism rather than simply enacting your kindness or your care or your compassion every day, if you're caught up in ideas about what idealism should look like or what the results should be someday, somehow, then when that doesn't happen, and it's likely not to happen, there'll be a reactivity to that, which can lead people to feel, I think, despair and nihilism, or what's the point, I guess. Does that make sense to you when I'm describing?
Well, absolutely, or frustration. I think that's,
yes, absolutely.
Frustration. I mean, frustration can turn to anger.
Yes,
and often it's not
sure
conscious,
can.
but then it strikes out when we least expect it, and it can strike out in areas of our relationships with others that have nothing to do with the situation.
Yeah.
Or even how we're caring for our own body, or how we're.
Yeah.
There's many ways that that energies, when they're frozen, because we've locked them in through our through believing in our thinking process, and a lot of that is, it's conditioning. It's for me that one of the most powerful things that has helped me in the time of this last political cycle and the current one, without going into too much detail, is to to understand I have a certain conditioning, and that's what forms how I think and how I act. And others have another conditioning from very young age, and we take on, they get so deep in us we don't even know what they are. And it doesn't matter how intelligent we are, and we know that, right? So for me, there's a sense of really respecting conditioning and cause and effect on that level as it plays out in the micro environment of politics and of family politics and all these different levels. And so what that does is that it doesn't mean you don't act. It doesn't mean from our point of view, we're not right and they're not wrong from our point of view, from their point of view.
Right.
But what it does is if we can move from the place where our heart is more open and more empathetic, fundamentally, then we understand interdependence, and we understand how often when there's one polarity of energy and of opinion of view, there's the other one. And they create each other too, and they support each other. So when we step out, if let's say if there was no, let's say all this angry energy is coming at a certain ideology, if we step out of the clinging, the veracity of the clinging, but still hold this, and they swing at you, you're not there. You're not just ducking and waiting to punch back. You actually aren't clinging to your ideal. Then that's a tremendous amount of energy that can be used to try to work skillfully. So, yeah.
So that's so intriguing. So I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying when you say you're actually not there. There's nothing to swing at because you've somehow managed to become aware of your own conditioning,
right,
which might initially lead you to oppose, and then as soon as you oppose, what you oppose gets stronger, as they say. But if you're not fighting against, because you've come to an awareness of the reality of conditioning for all of us, then the two things happen. One is you create a compassion and an understanding and an empathy for the conditioning that is driving the reactivity of somebody that might be disagreeing with you or even attacking you or trying to attack you. But you also become aware of your own conditioning and you don't cling to that anymore. And so you don't have to respond in either from a defensive posture or a counterattack. Did I understand you, Matthew?
Well, yes. I think the one piece that's missing, and then I'll give a little an example, sort of poem. I won't read the poem, but from ancient times, is that when I say you're not there, what it means is that you've just gotten out of that. It means you are not attached and clinging into your thinking mind. So you,
right. Yeah.
as this created identity of opposition, isn't there. It doesn't mean you're not because you're here. Right?
You're still physically there.
Right. So awareness, presence takes the place of that when we're clear. And the lessons of impermanence are that if we don't cling, this reactivity that we have comes and goes. It doesn't mean that we don't have it. It also means that the cause and conditions that are opposing us they're also based on cause and conditions. So we often blame. There's a story of a boat, and it bangs into a dock. It's in the fog, and it bangs into a dock, and the person who owns the dock comes out and starts screaming. And there was a big storm the night before, comes screaming and saying, "How dare you run your boat?" And when he gets close enough, he sees there's no one in the boat. And the boat just got loose of its mooring because it was a big storm the night before. So often there's cause and conditions that are beyond our control. And when we see that, even with our opposition, then we can work to do what we need to do with the boat, but we don't just launch in a personal, condemning attack of the person and the people and we shift from that. We understand the behavior and we work with that, but we realize it's cause and conditions that are playing out. Right. So in that sense, there's nobody there. It's an empty boat, even though it's acting in a way where it still hits the dock and we still have to deal with it.
Right. I like that example because I think that also can apply to many situations we find ourselves in where we might start cursing the person we thought was in the boat, driving it to the dock. And then we find out, it was other forces, conditions that brought that boat there. And there's no one to personally be aggravated with, which means we have to shift our consciousness somehow and arrive at a different place. I like that.
Well, the thing is, there is someone there, and that's why it's easy to latch, right? In politics, or someone in our family or at work not behaving, there is somebody there.
Yeah.
But so it's a little different, but it also,
Yeah,
they are the
right.
boat, right? But they
Yes.
are a product
Yeah.
of cause and condition. So
Right.
to me, that it doesn't solve it, but it opens the heart. And there's just a quality of just, this is the human condition. It's just a fact, this is the human condition. And we learn to relax into that in a way where we deal with it on the personal level, but we also just see there are these, it's like the weather changing. We had this huge hot front, and now today we had these storms last night, and now it's muggy, but it's much cooler.
Right.
Changing conditions, and oh, we're still here. Awareness is still here.
Yeah.
And that's what we have throughout our lives. That's the constant in between all the political shifts, all the changes in the environment, right?
Yeah.
And I think at some level, humans have a certain hubris, like when we look at the environmental issues and thinking the earth cares about us that much. We have that much power. No, and I actually think that but we create conditions so the earth can change as well. But they're powerful forces just at work and in the cosmos that are so powerful, and so our thinking minds, what we cling to isn't that important in the grander scale of things. So if we can also take that level, that can help align ourselves with this greater freedom of knowing we're connected and we're part of nature. And then I think from that place, it's much easier to actually try to affect ways of living with greater harmony and making the changes and the sacrifices that are necessary to do that individually and as a culture. But then we're living, because we're doing it as part of we then.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Versus me and you.
Yeah. And it's an expanded we.
It's a very expanded we, but it's also very practical. Right?
It is very practical. It's a great convergence. Thank you for that, Matthew. You've been talking about impermanence and change, and there is one quotation from your article that really struck me that I want to ask you to connect with the impermanence and change. And that's, you describe, and I'm starting the quotation here, an awareness that's committed to living as wisely as possible with the conditions just as they are, and with conditions as they change. And conditions just as they are. I love that phrase. I find it very calming. To me, this is the essential and ultimate act of letting go. And conditions just as they are, to me, can mean just accepting that literally this is what people are, this is what our species is, this is what our cosmos is, and people are a spectrum of people given the conditions that they have lived with, the people who are always kind to people who are generally cruel, and every combination in between. And that history, which is, I guess, another name for constant change, does appear to swing like a pendulum at different times, from freedom to oppression, from expanding human rights to constricting them. And this is who and what we are. So what I am curious about is, it seems as though the ultimate condition of life is death. It's the anticipated impermanence that we all live with and that shapes our consciousness. And to be the overarching backdrop somehow in our awareness for everything that we do, everything that we're aware of, how we think about life, because death is it is the way things are. And so I wanted to ask you, Matthew, how does Buddhism consider death? The change we all anticipate, but we won't experience it until it happens. Is that the end of impermanence from a Buddhist point of view, or the beginning of some other kind of impermanence? Or something in between?
Well, there's many, if you say Buddhism, so that's why I'm pausing.
Oh, okay.
Then I'll expand. So if you say Buddhism, then you can look at certain philosophical and metaphysical models. And then there are many different within the spectrum of Buddhism. Okay. So if you want to talk about metaphysics, then there may be certain assumptions that as a religious spiritual tradition are made. Okay. And so feel free. Many of the most powerful teachings for me that were given by the Buddha in terms of what happens after death is that's actually in the Kalama Sutta. This teaching he gave where he came to a village where there were many spiritual teachers passing through, and they asked him to why should they listen to him, and he said, very good question. You shouldn't go on tradition. You shouldn't go on what your friends say. You shouldn't go because someone's famous. You should take what they have, test it, and in your fire of your life. And if it works, it's gold. Treat it like gold. If it doesn't, throw it out. So in this teaching, someone asked him about death. What happens at death and after? And he said, well, if there is after death, right? Like that would be a new impermanent arising. Then if you live with the principles of kindness and clarity and cultivate those and uncover the native awareness that we have and let it shine more, then then you realize if there is one, then you're preparing for it wisely. And
I
if
love
there
that.
isn't one, it helps the quality of your life in the here and now. It'll help you to live this life. How do you want to live this life? So for me, it's a very experiential, and there's also somehow there's this teaching that how you live is how you'll die. So if we live in the fear of anticipation, then that's the energy that we'll die with. And whatever is next, that's just the energy we die with. And if there is something after, then that influences it, right? So, and then the last piece is simply that I take this personally as don't know. I simply don't know. And don't know can be both, I just don't know when we pass it off, but don't know can lead to, and there's one Zen teacher, Sangsanim, where this was his basic teaching. He said, practice don't know mind.
Okay.
And it means the mind that is so situated in buoyancy and in openness and knowing its own intrinsic nature that it doesn't have to know external outcomes. You don't know because you don't need to know. Or there's another one of a very famous Zen master who was approached by the Emperor of China. And he said, how did you get here to be this great master and this and that? And he said, I don't know. And it wasn't that it was brain dead. Of course he knew on a certain level. But he was giving the teaching,
yes.
Don't get caught in needing to know, because there's a power that can carry you into each unknown. And death is the ultimate unknown. So that's,
yes.
It simply is, right? We can't, that's how I think of it. We can't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad I asked the question because I really love the answer. Both the I don't know at every level, and also the idea that, if there is some kind of, if death is a portal to yet some other kind of impermanence, then we've been training for it all our lives. I find that very reassuring, Matthew. Matthew, how can I thank you enough for today? I always learn from you. I always leave our conversations inspired and happy because I find the ideas and your very accessible, wise way of framing them in your own inimitable style with stories and commentary, all very that follow your conditioning, I guess. Just very, they buoy me up. And so I'm very grateful to that. They always leave me with something to think about. And, so much of what you've said today is going to stay with me. And I'm so appreciative of your taking the time to come visit the morning show and share these wonderful wisdom with us. And my final question has to be, how can people find you and the Insight Meditation Center if they would like to follow this up with more?
Well, thank you, Mary. So in terms of that practical question, we have a website, the IMC Newburyport .org, and there's a full listing of programs that are that are going to be more and more at the center. We've been doing things on Zoom just during COVID, but we're in a transition period.
Wonderful.
So there's some teaching at the center live and some still on Zoom. So you can access that through our website. We have morning sittings at the center, at the physical center. You can come and sit at the center. There's beginning classes. There's more ongoing classes. So I teach a Wednesday evening class, and there's weekend retreats and workshops, and there's a whole range of, and really there's a sense of community and safety, which I feel is really important, and to be able to, just as we did today a little bit, to have a community, to have others where you can work with, you can practice, but you can also, and you're clearly, Mary, you clearly, this isn't just skin deep for you. Right? It's a little deeper. Maybe it's even bone deep in terms of understanding that there's an impact in where we come from and what we return to inside ourselves. So I'm very encouraged. And so community really helps that. So we had a little community today of two, and hopefully we get to share that with others as well. So Insight Meditation Center of Newburyport is a place where you can connect in community, both on Zoom and then more and hopefully mostly fully in person in the fall. And it's a beautiful center on top of a hill right near the Newburyport Reservoir. So thank you. Thanks.
It is a beautiful center and a very peaceful place. So thank you, Matthew.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, the honor and pleasure is totally mine. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you'll join us next Thursday at 9 a.m. on Channel 9 for the morning show. If you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show. Just go to ncmhub.org and click on the YouTube icon and playlist, and then scroll down. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. And it will also be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just go to ncmhub.org and click on the cloud icon in the upper right-hand corner and scroll down. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Matthew. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mary. Bye-bye.